Arthas was once Lordaeron's brightest hope, but the dark pull of Frostmourne twisted him into the realm's greatest nightmare. Driven by a maddening urge to purge the living, he turned his back on his people and marched a tireless army of the dead across the land. No kingdom was safe. This is the tragic and blood-soaked history of the prince who traded his crown for the throne of death. If this is your first time visiting the channel, welcome. My name is Quaylen, and I'm in the middle of abridging the World of Warcraft Chronicle series. That means I'm taking the lore contained within these books and condensing it even more than it already is. I'm not diving into the deep details or the novels that have more information, just sticking to what's written in the books. So again, apart from what you read in the title of the video, I'll be sharing other bits of information. In essence, I'm telling the story in order as the books tell it. Currently, we're on Volume 3, but if you want to start from the beginning, then I suggest clicking the link in the tab up above or in the description down below. That will lead you to a video that contains all 10 episodes covering the lore in Volume 1. But if you're already caught up with the story, then let's continue our journey into the tales of Azeroth. With Lordaeron fallen and the Alliance crippled, the Burning Legion prepared to cross the Great Sea and seize the Second Well of Eternity. Leading the invasion would be Archimonde the Defiler, a seasoned battle commander who assembled a hand-picked force of demons experienced in waging war on Azeroth, including Manaroth, the Pit Lord whose blood had once enslaved the orcs. Archimonde's force had to be small, as no portal powerful enough to bring the full legion to Azeroth could be created without first harnessing the Second Well of Eternity. To even bring Archimonde through, a servant would need to create and anchor a portal on Azeroth itself. The Lich King proposed a solution, the Book of Medivh, locked away in Dalaran. The book contained guardian power and detailed instructions for creating portals, making it sufficient to bring Archimonde and his vanguard into the world. The Lich King argued that resurrecting Kel'Thuzad, a former ruler of Dalaran, was the key to retrieving it. The Dreadlords approved, never suspecting the Lich King's true motive, rebuilding his roster of loyal servants for an eventual rebellion against the Legion. But how did the book get there? Well, at the end of the Second War, Archmage Khadgar had sent the Book of Medivh and the Skull of Gul'dan through the Dark Portal to Dalaran for safekeeping. Just before the gateway was destroyed and the connection between Azeroth and Draenor was severed. Arthas marched on Anderhal to recover Kel'Thuzad's remains, finding the once fertile Eastwell transformed into a toxic, decayed wasteland, now known as the Plaguelands. The city was one of the last Alliance strongholds in Lordaeron, held by Uther the Lightbringer and surviving paladins who used it as a base to strike back against the Scourge. Arthas stormed Anderhal and cut through the paladins with ease. Uther proved far more formidable, besting Arthas in combat and nearly delivering a killing blow. But Arthas recovered and drove Frostmourne through his former mentor's heart. As Uther died, Arthas felt nothing. The man who had been like a father to him was just a ghost from a life he no longer recognized. With Anderhal fallen and Kel'Thuzad's remains secured, the Lich King set his next plan in motion. Rather than simply resurrecting Kel'Thuzad, the Dreadlords would transform him into a Lich, a powerful spectral being infused with magic. Doing so would require a potent source of arcane energy. That source was the Sunwell, a sacred fount of arcane power at the heart of the High Elven kingdom of Quel'Thalas. It was the lifeblood of the High Elves, and they would fight to the last to defend it. Arthas would fight just as hard to take it. As the Scourge pushed into Silverpine Forest, their advance was stopped by the Greymane Wall, the massive barrier sealing off the human kingdom of Gilneas. King Gen Greymane had kept his kingdom isolated from the wider world, and the wall's existence seemed to vindicate that decision. Confident the undead would eventually give up, Greymane waited, but the Scourge never tired or retreated. As their numbers grew and the assault on the wall intensified, Greymane ordered his army out through the gates to drive them back. It was a disaster. The Gilnean soldiers were crushed, and the fallen rose as undead and turned on their own comrades. Desperate, Greymane turned to his royal archmage Arugal, who proposed summoning creatures called Worgen, powerful wolf-like beings that walked upright and slumbered in the Emerald Dream. Arugal warned that they were savage and nearly impossible to control, but Greymane had no other choice. Arugal performed the summoning, opening a rift to the Emerald Dream and drawing the Worgen into Silverpine Forest. The wolf beasts tore through the Scourge with ferocious power, driving the undead back, and then immediately turned on the Gilneans as well, unable to distinguish friend from foe. The surviving soldiers fled behind the wall and sealed the gates. The Scourge were gone, and the Worgen appeared to be locked outside, and for a moment, it seemed the crisis had passed. It hadn't. Worgen began appearing inside the wall. Soldiers who had been bitten before retreating had carried a curse back with them. Over time, the affliction transformed its victims into wolf beasts, who then spread the curse further throughout Gilneas. In trying to save his kingdom, Greymane had traded one monstrous enemy for another. Arthas and the Scourge marched into the forest bordering Quel'Thalas to find them eerily silent and deserted, not because the High Elves had fled, but because they were preparing. King Anastarion's Sunstrider rallied his people and entrusted the defense of the kingdom to Ranger General Sylvanas Windrunner, a decorated veteran who had fought in the Second War and earned a fierce reputation battling the Amani trolls. Sylvanas sent the kingdom's magi and priests to Silvermoon City as a last line of defense and led her rangers, the Farstriders, into the woods to mount a fierce resistance. Her plan was to make the Scourge bleed for every step forward and buy the capital's defenders as much time as possible. The fighting was brutal and relentless. Though outnumbered, Sylvanas' tactical brilliance kept the Scourge at bay longer than expected, frustrating Arthas and forcing him to pay dearly for every advance. Knowing the Scourge would eventually break through, Sylvanas ordered a final stand outside the city and faced Arthas herself. Weakened by days of hard battle, Sylvanas fought valiantly, but could not match Arthas' strength. Frostmourne cut her down. Death was not the end. Arthas tore her spirit from her body and transformed her into a spectral banshee, chaining her to the Lich King's will and forcing her to fight against the very people she had died trying to protect. Silvermoon fell. Arthas drove north toward the Isle of Quel'Danas, home of the Sunwell. The surviving elves, including King Anastarion, retreated to the island by fleet, believing the Scourge's lack of ships would buy them time. They were wrong. Arthas plunged Frostmourne into the sea, freezing the water and forming an ice bridge that carried the Scourge across to the island. King Anastarion prepared to make his stand. Elderly, but wise and battle-hardened, he wielded the ancient blade Felomalorn and dueled Arthas on the frozen shores, lasting longer against the Death Knight than almost anyone before him. It was not enough. Arthas shattered Felomalorn with a single brutal strike and ended the king's life with the next. With morale shattered, the remaining defenders were swept away, and very few elves escaped. Arthas reached the Sunwell and submerged Kel'Thuzad's remains in its depths, using its boundless magic to transform the fallen necromancer into a powerful lich. The ritual corrupted the Sunwell permanently, and its tainted energies slowly spread through Quel'Thalas and the elves who remained there. With his work done, Arthas gathered the Scourge and marched south toward Dalaran, leaving ruin in his wake. Every stretch of land the undead had touched withered and died, forming a lasting wound in the world that would come to be known as the Dead Scar. Silvermoon's defenses, including the powerful magical barrier Bandinorial, which drew its power from the Sunwell, might have held if not for a traitor within. The High Elf Magister, Darkon Drathir, was a talented but bitter mage who felt he had never received the recognition he deserved. Arthas sensed his resentment and offered him power and prestige in exchange for his loyalty. Darkon accepted and betrayed his entire race, helping the Scourge dismantle and bypass Quel'Thalas's magical defenses from within. Before we continue, I'd like to mention that if you're enjoying this content, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, if you feel inclined to support the work that I'm doing, you can check out my membership options here on YouTube or on Patreon. I'm really grateful for all of those who have supported this massive project that I've been working on for quite some time now, and I do offer early access to all those people who have signed up. So if you're interested, check out the links down below, and let's get back to the story. As the Scourge closed in on Dalaran, Archmage Antonidas and the Kirin Tor prepared their defenses, evacuating civilians and fortifying the city with powerful magical wards. Despite their preparations, a sense of doom hung over Dalaran. If Lordaeron and Quel'Thalas had fallen, few believed the city could hold. The despair caused Antonidas to reflect on the hooded stranger who had warned him to flee west. He now understood that the prophet had been right all along, but it was too late for him to leave. His duty was to Dalaran and its vaults of magic. However, he urged his apprentice, Jaina Proudmoore, to go in his place. Jaina was reluctant. She wanted to stand beside Antonidas, and she still felt guilt over abandoning Arthas at Stratholme, sensing him among the approaching Scourge and wondering if he could still be saved. After much debate, she relented, recognizing that if both she and Antonidas perished, no one would be left to act on the prophet's warning. Master and apprentice said their goodbyes, both knowing without saying it that they would never see each other again. Jaina immediately set to work gathering as many refugees as she could find. When Jaina finally set sail for Kalimdor, her fleet carried survivors from Lordaeron, Quel'Thalas, and beyond, members of nearly every Alliance race united behind a single cause. They followed her because she represented something that had all but disappeared from the Eastern Kingdoms: hope. On the way to Dalaran, Kel'Thuzad warned Arthas that the Legion viewed the Scourge as disposable and that the Lich King planned to eventually rebel against the demons. Arthas needed no convincing. He already despised the Dreadlords and looked forward to the day he could strike them down. For now, though, he had a job to do. In Dalaran, the Kirin Tor put up a fierce defense, battering the Scourge with waves of arcane magic. Arthas used this as a diversion, slipping into the city with Kel'Thuzad and a small force while the defenders were occupied. The Dreadlord Tichondrius accompanied them to keep watch over Arthas. Using Kel'Thuzad's knowledge of the city, Arthas fought his way to the vault holding the Book of Medivh, where Antonidas stood waiting. Like so many before him, Antonidas fought with everything he had and fell to Frostmourne. Arthas noticed Jaina was absent, and a brief, unexpected flicker of relief passed through him before fading just as quickly. Kel'Thuzad retrieved the Book of Medivh and was immediately struck by the staggering amount of power and knowledge it contained. He drew on all of it and wove a spell that tore open a rift between Azeroth and the twisting nether. Tichondrius also seized the Skull of Gul'dan from the vault before withdrawing. Demons poured through the rift. Fellhounds and Infernals first, followed by Manaroth, the Doomlord Khazak, and finally, Archimonde himself, setting foot on Azeroth for the first time in over 10,000 years. Archimonde turned his fury on Dalaran immediately, unraveling the city's magical energies and bringing its glittering spires crashing down into rubble. With the city destroyed, Archimonde transferred control of the Scourge to the Dreadlords, dismissing the Lich King as no longer necessary. He then ordered the bulk of his forces to eliminate the last remnants of the Alliance in Lordaeron, ensuring no enemies could follow the Legion to Kalimdor. Manaroth and Tichondrius were sent ahead to Kalimdor to clear the way for the Legion's arrival. Arthas pulled the Scourge back from Dalaran. The Book of Medivh had been recovered, Archimonde had arrived, and the Legion's invasion of Kalimdor was now inevitable. With the Burning Legion arriving on Azeroth, Medivh knew the assault on Kalimdor was imminent. The Horde and Alliance had nearly reached the continent, but bringing them together would be his greatest challenge yet. Too much hatred existed between them for a direct approach. He needed to maneuver them into a face-to-face meeting, and he chose Stone Talon Peak, a sacred and magical suffused mountain south of the World-3, as the place to make it happen. Both Thrall and Jaina faced hardships as they marched inland from the eastern coast, and both questioned whether coming to Kalimdor had been the right decision. The land was harsh and unforgiving, offering little reassurance that hope awaited them here. For Thrall, the march brought an unexpected discovery: wreckage from his missing fleet, confirming that Grommash Hellscream and the Warsong orcs had survived the storm and reached Kalimdor ahead of him. Unable to find them, Thrall pressed deeper into the continent in search of the rest of his horde. Instead of finding Grommash, Thrall found himself in the middle of a war between two of Kalimdor's native races, the Tauren and the Centaur. The Tauren were enormous but gentle bovine people with deep ties to nature and a strong tradition of shamanism. The Centaur were brutal and warlike, hunting the Tauren for sport across Kalimdor's open plains. For generations, the Tauren had endured these attacks, choosing to relocate rather than waste lives in prolonged conflict. They lived in a constant cycle of war and displacement, accepting it as simply the way of things. Thrall immediately felt a kinship with the Tauren and their wise leader, High Chieftain Cairn Bloodhoof. He saw in them the same spirit as his own people, noble, misunderstood, and yearning for a better future. He refused to look away from the injustice before him. The Horde joined the Tauren in battle against the Centaur and the Barons, and their combined strength shattered the Centaur warbands, sending them retreating in disgrace. The Centaur would never again see the Tauren as easy prey. For the first time in living memory, the Tauren glimpsed a future free from the endless cycle of conflict. Their nomadic existence was over. They set their sights on the grassy plains of Mulgore, where they would finally build a permanent home. In gratitude, Cairn offered Thrall supplies and some of his finest warriors to help the Horde reach Stone Talon Peak. The alliance between the Orcs and Tauren had been forged in battle and would endure far beyond it. Meanwhile, Medivh continued to carefully guide both Thrall and Jaina toward their inevitable meeting, knowing that the fate of Azeroth depended on what happened when they finally came face to face. Though the road to Stone Talon Peak remained treacherous, with savage quillboar and poisonous scorpids prowling the harsh red wasteland, both factions pushed on, drawn forward by the fragile hope that something worth fighting for waited at the end of the journey. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like this kind of content, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you'd like to support the work that I'm doing, please check out my YouTube, Patreon, or Twitch memberships. And a big shout out to all the names on the screen here. You mean so much to me. Thank you so much for your help. And with that, I'll see you guys next time on the Tales of Azeroth.